Hi, this video on practical food policies is the last in a series. Um, this series has been focusing on agri-food politics and policy, and now we're just going to look at some actual, we started off more abstract, theoretical. Now we're going to pin down a few, more tangible solutions that come in the form of policy. So to do this, we have to think about policies, for instance, that surround media and information and education because one of the biggest obstacles to promoting food democracy is disinformation and misinformation. And many argue that corporations have begun to be too powerful in terms of their propaganda, misleading consumers, and even lying to them outright in order to continue, you know, maintaining their legitimacy so that they can continue to sell products and make a profit. So, maybe the best indication of that are ag-gag laws that we've discussed, where essentially experts are prevented from speaking out against the practices of corporations. Those are gag laws in general. So, in terms of agriculture, let's say a physician suspects that somebody might be sick because of a particular food they ate. Well, they have to be very careful about, pointing to that as the root cause. Or let's say they suspect somebody might have cancer because, they've come into contact with pesticides that were being sprayed at a farm near their house. Those physicians have to be very careful in states that have gag laws because they could be sued for libel, right? They could be personally, legally liable if they start blaming large companies for getting people sick. Uh, so there's just a lot of intimidation, right, and silencing of experts who would otherwise seek to protect people in society because the laws just don't protect the experts with those goals. They protect the companies. Uh, Non-governmental organizations can be a partner. They can be a solution in this context. Unlike individuals who might be afraid to take on a company who's a huge multinational corporation, a non-governmental organization has more resources. They have more ability to take cases to court, to challenge corporations. Many NGOs have large budgets, and so they can actually go toe to toe. They have lobbyists they can send to help get different politicians elected. And so, within the context of the US at least, where you don't really have a strong government, NGOs, many people say they're instrumental. They're going to be central to uh, creating a partnership for society, sort of like a sort of acting like a government agency without really having that same authority. So then the challenge for NGOs are going to be political actors who are sort of in the pocket of corporations. How do you overcome that? And that's something that is just built into the system as a problem. Specifically, many are pointing to the Citizens United standard in the ruling of the Supreme Court, which essentially arrived at the view that corporations are people and have the same rights as people. So the Bill of Rights that you and I enjoy is extended to corporations. And out of that comes really absurd interpretations like free speech protection, which basically opens the door to any kind of propaganda, and misinformation and disinformation stems from that protected right. So, to counter that, more public forums that involve NGO presence, experts who have the goal of protecting consumers and workers and so forth, more public forums to educate people could be beneficial. Another kind of practical solution to a lot of food problems is labeling. We mentioned bovine growth hormone and some of the challenges with getting food labeling laws passed, but they can be very effective. They can refer to different production methods. So the ethical food movement is really focused on that, ethically produced foods. They can look at processing methods, so the kinds of things that industrial food companies do to food, many people find just unacceptable. So sort of just simplifying foods. There's a movement around removing some of that processing and simplifying and promoting the consumption of whole foods. Place of origin labeling is another category. Knowing where your food comes from, that's important, of course, to those who promote local food production. But not just locavores, but anybody who's concerned about where their food is coming from. Some people just want to buy. Maybe they're okay with globalization, but they know where ethical practices are and where they aren't. And then also labeling on distribution methods. How has the food been distributed? Other practical policies we've talked about. Some of these correspond to some of the social movements we've examined around food sovereignty and repeasantization. So you can also have laws that support those things. Valuing traditional agricultural methods. If you can write that into law somehow, protecting traditional farmers and heirloom varieties and those kinds of things can be important. Making food rights and sovereignty a goal is just an important thing to write into law where it's possible. Ensuring that on a regional or national level, nation states can be food self-sufficient and that farmers are not totally beholden to markets, that they actually have some sovereignty themselves, the ability to feed themselves and survive, especially in less developed countries. Protecting rural resources for rural people, including indigenous populations, especially. Some of this is beyond the U.S. context, obviously. This is now looking more in the developing world, less developed countries that are still very agricultural, look more like the United States 100 years ago. Uh, you know, One of the benefits of protecting rural people and populations is that it alleviates some of the stress on cities in less developed countries, which have massive migration flows, and people are fleeing the countryside because they aren't able to support themselves. Their farming has become unsustainable, so people are losing their livelihoods in the countryside and moving to the city, and this has overwhelmed the infrastructure and the housing, and people are living in makeshift shacks in these edge cities, and so if we start looking out for rural people, we're going to alleviate some of that urban migration stress. And on a national scale, if less developed countries become more food sovereign, that lessens their need for food aid, less reliance on external imports, right, for food. And we've talked about the complexity of that. Seems like a good thing to give people food, but it can devastate agricultural markets, which undermine food sovereignty in the long run. So the other thing, pragmatically speaking, policy has to consider are some of the global local market arrangements, for instance, fair trade versus free trade. If we're going to continue trading things globally, so this is not for the locavores who want to eliminate global trade, but those who want to maintain global trade but in a more ethical way. They want things like fair trade labeling to be applied. Rebalancing global trade deals is important here. So this involves global actors like the United Nations, and of course trade unions, trade agreements, the World Trade Organization, and so forth. Reintroducing trade unions is actually something that some people would like to see happen. Having more of a global front that protects certain commodities, sort of operate like OPEC does, where they set a price for oil and then all the constituent states have to play by the rules. Because if they lose their unity, then they all stand to lose, because you'll lose the ability to control production, and that will destroy prices. So one of the key questions, though, in these types of policies is what role local production is going to have, and to what extent we're going to embrace a local model. And what does that even mean? And we're going to be dealing with that in a separate week, separate videos. So just kind of finishing up, as we think pragmatically about politics and returning to the context of the United States, specifically, we have to look at farm bills because that is where most of the structural solutions, the policies related to agri-food come out of, right? So what is the farm bill? What are the role of subsidies? These farm bills come out approximately every 5 years. They dictate, the role of subsidies in farming in the United States, uh, which has major implications for global trade, often disadvantaging less developed countries. Uh, they set the rules on farmer protections domestically, price supports, supply controls, those things that were integral in the 1930s that have been eliminated. There's still some push to restore some of those protections. And SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also comes out of the Farm Bill and is a highly important program to maintaining, towards fighting hunger. So we have some other videos specifically on the Farm Bill, so take a look at those. And thanks for watching.